Anybody who walks around our great city or travels to the countryside are often put off when they see homeless women at street corners and out front of stores, usually followed by 5 or 6 children, all in rags, all begging for money from everyone who walks by. These moms, instead of getting a job and thus having their own money, spend all their time begging for money to feed their starving children. But we know that when those children grow up, they become thieves because they refuse to get jobs, or they join the army to kill the enemy, or they sell themselves as indentured servants in the Caribbean. I know we all can agree that having these children is a real problem and a burden to our country right now. If anybody could think up a cheap and easy plan for turning these children into useful, contributing members of society, that person would be celebrated forever as saving our country. I'm not just thinking of the children of homeless beggars. I'm also thinking of the children of the working poor and lower classes. I've been thinking about this issue for a long time, many years. And after thinking and studying all the schemes thus far presented as solutions to the problems I'm describing here, I believe these plans will never work and are deeply flawed. Yes, it's true that a newborn baby can live off its mother's milk for a year with no other food. It only needs a couple dollars worth that the mother can get by begging, either for food or money. But when the kids become one, I propose we do with them something so that they won't burden their parents or society that are asked to pay and take care of them when their parents can't. In this, my plan, these children will no longer need others to feed and clothe them for the rest of their lives. No, on the contrary, in my plan, they will feed and clothe the rest of society. My plan is also great because it will stop the problem of abortion that we have. It will stop all these women who use abortion as birth control and murder their illegitimate bastard babies, usually because they can't afford a child, something which should cause even the hardest and cruelest person to feel pity. They say we have over 1.5 million people living in our country now, which means about 200,000 couples with a wife who can still conceive. From this equation, I take out the 30,000 couples who can afford to take care of and feed their children. But this may be an exaggerated figure because of our levels of poverty in our country today. This leaves us with 170,000 couples breeding. I will also subtract from this 50,000 for all the women who miscarry or whose babies die in the first year. This leaves us with 120 children born to poor people every year. The question then is obvious. How are we going to feed and support all these children? None of the current solutions are worth anything because we can't give the poor skilled labor jobs or even farming jobs. The government today is not helping people with housing, and no one's growing crops right now. Even if these poor kids want to become thieves, they won't be able to until at least the age of 6, with some exceptions because some become skilled thieves much earlier. But until they're 6 years old, they're only thieves in training. One merchant told me that even if you wanted to sell poor children into slavery, if they're under 12 years old, they're worthless. You could only get a couple hundred for each one, which wouldn't pay for all the expenses of food and clothes already spent on them. There'd be no profit for the parents or society. Let me now tell you and explain my new plan. A very smart man from America who I met in London recently told me that a baby or a toddler, if well fed, especially when it reaches a year old, is a delicious, nourishing, and healthy meal, whether stewed, roasted, baked, or boiled. It can also work great in a fricassee or stew. I humbly suggest that we slaughter and eat these 120,000 children, leaving 20,000 alive for reasons of population maintenance and breeding, allowing only 1/4 of the males to live, which is more than what we allow for sheep, cows, or pigs. If my logic is right, if we say that most married couples usually have only 3 kids, at least in the middle and upper classes, because the poorer people don't care about ethics or marriage, where one man can impregnate as many women as needed, say 4 women at a time, as is usually the case. I propose we sell the 100,000 left at age 1 to rich people as a gourmet delicacy. We'll tell the mothers, of course, not to skimp on the milk, especially in the last month, so the babies are well fed and fat and ready for the dinner table. A whole child has enough meat on its bones to make 2 main courses for a dinner party. Or when a family eats alone, either its front or back quarters will make a delicious meal. And with salt and pepper, I'd say it could keep for at least 4 days, after which it could be boiled with an especially delicious dish in winter. I've run the numbers, and this is what I found. The average baby is, say, 12 pounds. And from there, after feeding it for a year, it could get to be about 28 pounds. As I just said, baby meat will be a delicacy and thus very expensive. But remember, baby meat will be in season all year with an influx in March. I'm informed by a reliable source, a distinguished author and French doctor, that because of forbidding birth control, there are far more Catholic babies than Protestant babies, and thus this will also serve another problem and reduce the number of Catholics in Ireland. The cost of bringing up a child for a beggar, including also migrant workers and 80% of farmers, is only about a couple $100 for its first year, including all rags they get for clothes and any child care provisions needed. But I'm sure a rich gourmand would pay at least $1,000 for the body of a fat, freshly killed human child, which will supply the meat for at least 4 meals. This will benefit everyone. The gourmand will have a tasty dinner, the butcher will get paid, and the mother will get her fair share and support herself with the money until she can get pregnant again. If some families are exceptionally bad off, may I suggest they make more money from the children by skinning them and then treating their skins and using the leather to make gloves and boots for rich people to wear. As for Dublin, we can make slaughterhouses in the biggest ghettos and slums, and we'll be happy to employ many people as butchers. Although for the true gourmand, I recommend they buy living babies and then kill them at home and cook them immediately after slaughter, like is done with roast pigs. A good man I know, a true patriot, who I trust and admire, spoke with me, and we discussed this, my new idea and solution to the problem. And he said something that improved my idea, perhaps to no end. He pointed out that most men, most hunters, have run out of deer to shoot, and we could replace the lack of venison with the hunting of children around the ages of 12 and 14. All these children from these countries are starving to death because there's no jobs for them. The only solution is for their parents to kill them and sell their meat for money. And if the parents aren't around, their other relatives could do it for them. But I disagree with him, though, in the end. Children are best eaten as infants. My American friend told me that at that age, their meat is more tough and lean, mostly due to all their playing and sports. He said they don't taste good at that age, and fattening them up wouldn't help. We wouldn't want to eat the girls of that age, especially because we'll need them for breeders. I want to point out the actual possibility that it might offend some people reading this, and they will think all of this is cruelty. They're wrong. But this concern has been my chief concern through this entire thought process. In defense of my friend, he said he got the idea from that famous Salmanazar from Formosa who'd come to England 2 decades before. Talking to my friend, he said that in his country, whenever they executed teenagers or even preteens, the executioners would sell the corpses of the teenagers to rich people who'd cook and eat them as the delicacies they are. Once a fat 15-year-old girl, tried to assassinate the emperor, and so they crucified her. They then cut her body up into small parts and sold them to high-level officials and rich people, bringing in a profit of over $10,000. If we did the same thing to all the fat girls, the teenagers in Dublin, who are all broke but demand only the best, and even dress in the styles of foreign countries, depending on what the fashion trends are, if we slaughtered and ate them all, we wouldn't be any worse off than we are now. Some bleeding heart liberals have asked what we should do with the thousands of poor people who are old, sick, or disabled. I've thought long and hard about this question on how to free our country from these burdens. In the end, I don't see what the big deal is. Isn't it obvious that today they're dying off every day by the hundreds, dead and rotting from cold, hunger, filth, and disease as fast and as much as we could hope for? Even if we systematically slaughtered them all, we couldn't do a faster job at a greater volume than they're doing on their own now. As for the labor force, the working poor, today they're just as bad off as the old and disabled. They can't get work, and so they starve. And because of starving, their bodies weaken. So then they're not strong enough to work if a job comes up. If they can starve and die at the same rate as the old and sick, we'd be in good shape. But I've digressed. Going back to my proposal, I think its advantages are obvious and many, and what's more, very important. First off, it'll cut down on Catholics that are growing in number exponentially each year. They are our enemies, and they've only stuck around the UK because they want to conquer us and hand Ireland over to the great pretender, the Pope. They want to take advantage of the diaspora of the Calvinists who don't want to tithe or pay taxes to a church they do not belong to or believe in. Second, this proposal gives poor people commodities and product, goods, valuable goods that give them a shot in the arm financially. Actual commodities they can prosper from. Whenever, say, they run out of money, they can pop out a baby, and we can use, eventually, babies and poor children as currency themselves. Third, we bring in over 100,000 poor children every year in Ireland alone. We have more than enough to only use domestic products and not concern ourselves with importing babies from other countries, thus keeping the money here with us. Fourth, the godless poor who are constantly popping out babies, bastards or otherwise, will profit for two reasons. They'll earn at least $40,000 a year from selling their children, and simultaneously, none of that new income will ever have to go to their kids because they'll sell and slaughter them at 1 year old. Fifth, restaurants would do amazingly well if they could serve human babies. We'd all benefit from the delicious new recipes they'd come up with. This would appeal to the wealthy gourmands out there, and a brilliant chef cooking human babies for the rich could ask for as much as he wanted for his rare dishes. Sixth, this would be a great incentive for people to get married. Already, most intelligent countries encourage people to get married with financial incentives and give penalties to those who don't marry. Think about it. Mothers would take much better care of their babies, knowing they'd only have them for a year, knowing that then, after that year, they'd get a chunk of money to take it off their hands. Are you kidding me? We'd soon see married mothers competing for who has the fattest baby at the market. Men would treat their wives better, like they do with their animals when they are pregnant. Abused women would stop getting beaten up by their men who would now cherish them for fear of causing a miscarriage. The men would take pride in and cherish their women because their women produce their living now through giving birth. The benefits of this proposal are endless. We could double our meat exports. We'll no longer have shortages on bacon. And the people would soon discover that human bacon made from 1 year old babies, that majestic taste of a 1 year old baby, is better than any bacon from a pig. Just think how handsome a whole roasted child would look on a holiday table or a wedding feast. But let me continue. You see, I could go on indefinitely on the rewards of this, my proposal, but I know I must stay brief. Now, if we say that there are at least 1,000 families here in Dublin that would regularly buy fresh slaughtered human babies, along with many others who would consistently purchase baby meat for special occasions, for weddings and birthdays, I figured Dublin could eat 20,000 babies a year. The rest of the UK and foreign markets could devour the other 80,000 dead babies, though they probably sell cheaper than those who would get the freshly slaughtered baby meat. I can't even think of one objection to this proposal, except if people are worried about the lowering of the population in the country. And yes, I admit that this is true. And this is exactly why I'm writing you this proposal. Now remember, I ask you, the reader, to remember I'm only making this proposal for the people of Ireland and not any other country, past, present, or future. So I don't want to hear about other solutions like putting taxes on absentee landlords, about stop buying imported goods, about stopping women from throwing away all their money, especially while gambling, about starting a campaign to encourage thriftiness, sobriety, and mindfulness, about loving our country, about not selling out our country or personal ethics for pennies, about making landlords behave fairly for their renters, and finally to get store owners to become honest, competent, and hardworking. Again, I don't want to hear your nonsense arguments or ideas unless you can guarantee they can work and get lived out and put into practice. As for me, I've worked nonstop. I've worked past exhaustion, coming up with outrageous ideas and solutions for various problems. But none of these ideas ever really took off until this one. This idea, my modest proposal is so new, so potent and doable, and what is more, there are no startup costs. It'll be so easy to do, and we'll control it here in Ireland, and the English will stop bothering us. But remember, I'm a reasonable person, and I'm not so attached to my idea that I'd reject another solution that is, if the solution was equally honest, cheap, easy, and efficient as this, my modest proposal. But anyone who dismisses my idea over other presented solutions, I suggest they honestly think about two things before they speak up. First, ask yourself this: if things continue as they are now, how do you propose we clothe and feed 100,000 poor and useless people? Second, there are over 1 million people in this our country, and to provide for everyone would put us in debt for millions of dollars a year, especially when we include the homeless, the farmers, migrant workers, and the working poor, and their families who are basically beggars except in name. Politicians who don't like my plan and move to contradict it should first, before assuming, ask the parents what they think about the proposal. Would they be happy selling their children at 1 year old, as I've just described, and no longer live the unending misery their lives have been? Their landlords oppress the poor. They can't pay rent because they don't work. They don't have food or clothes or a place to live to protect them from the weather. If we don't implement this, my plan, the poor will continue this perpetual torture of poverty indefinitely. And let me just add that I don't have any personal investment in this, my plan. My only motivation is helping my fellow citizens by increasing trade, providing for poor babies, helping the poor, and giving the rich a taste treat. Personally, none of my children are of the age that I could still use them for this. They're no longer tasty. So please remember, I did not write this for personal profit. My youngest is already 9 years old, and my wife is too old to have any more babies.